honest mistakes or unexplainable ones, and bizarre twists of fate. These can all lead to tragedy, especially if you find yourself dealing with nature and its apex predators. Welcome to another fierce marathon, a compendium of chilling stories that are guaranteed to make you think twice before venturing into the wild. And if you find yourself frightened, don't say you weren't warned. This is Fierce. It was September 2005. At that point, Mark Jordan and Jaqueline Perry had been married for almost 4 years, and their anniversary was coming up. They were both very active people who liked outdoor activities, so finding the perfect spot to spend their anniversary wasn't probably too hard for the two of them. They lived in Cambridge, a city in the regional municipality of Waterloo, Ontario, Canada, so they were well accustomed to modern life and its demands. In fact, both Mark and Jaqueline had important jobs. He was a software engineer, and she was a medical doctor. Despite the challenging character of their respective jobs, or maybe because of it, the young couple tried not to ignore their innate inclination toward nature. That's why, besides his regular job as a software engineer, Mark was also a scout leader. Mark and Jaqueline chose to spend their anniversary in the backcountry of Missinaibi Lake Provincial Park, a park situated in northern Ontario. They wanted a remote place, somewhere in the very heart of nature. Celebrations were in order not only because they were quickly approaching the 4-year mark as a wedded couple, but also because Jaqueline had just accepted a new job. The woman had been offered a part-time position at Cambridge Memorial Hospital's emergency department, where she was set to start her new job in less than a month. So the two of them embarked on a 2-week holiday with big plans of camping and kayaking. As with any other inhabitants of Ontario, Mark and Jaqueline were well aware of the territory's immense beauty. Missinaibi Provincial Park, their destination, is located in northern Ontario. If you know anything about northern Ontario, it's probably the fact that the territory is huge. It actually covers 90% of the area of Ontario. And you may also know that the population is as scarce as the land is vast. Only 6% of Ontario's total population lives in the northern part of the province. It's all about the nature up there, with the boreal forest covering most of the land. And when it gets remote, it really gets remote. The distances are large, and the backcountry can be unforgiving even to experienced travelers. To the inexperienced or just unlucky ones, it can be deadly. Missinaibi Provincial Park is perfect for anyone who wants to spend some time away from the usual rush and the multiple stimuli of modern life. Overall, it's a good place for an escapade. The park is located at the center of Chapleau Crown Game Preserve, a fur-bearing animal preserve northeast of Lake Superior. Missinaibi is a bit over 310 miles long, encompassing multiple lakes, impressive waterfalls, and stunning whitewater, perfect for some adrenaline-inducing kayaking. There are several campsites and canoe sites, and as everywhere in the preserve, wildlife abounds in Missinaibi Provincial Park. Mark and Jaqueline chose one of the backcountry campsites on Missinaibi Lake. The site was secluded, both intimate and exciting enough for the two nature lovers. The two of them would often go hiking, and given their love for nature and Mark's experience as a scout leader, they had enough trust in their abilities to fend for themselves in the wilderness. The couple had to drive north to the park, and then they had to paddle their way to the campsite in a kayak. There's no indication that anything worrisome or at least suspicious had happened before Tuesday, September 6, 2005. Instead, the couple spent their days enjoying the outdoors, as they'd often done before, breathing in the fresh air and relishing in the nice stretch of their muscles after paddling their boat. However, their joy was soon cut short. What was meant to be a lifetime spent together turned into only a few hours of pain, desperation, and vain hope. September 6, 2005 started like every other day at the campsite. Later that afternoon, though, disaster struck, and with it came a gruesome fight for survival. Mark Jordan and Jaqueline Perry were preparing dinner at their campsite in a rugged, remote region within the park, near Lake Missinaibi. Everything seemed, looked, and sounded normal until it didn't. It all happened so quickly, there was no time to properly act. A black bear suddenly appeared at their campsite, and as if seeing a bear up close and personal wasn't enough, this animal didn't seem to be merely aggressive. No, the bear seemed to be predatory. There was no doubt the bear's intention was to kill. It struck lightning fast. In an instant, the bear leapt, pinning Jaqueline to the ground. The creature didn't waste any second. It grabbed the woman and then started dragging her into the bush. To Mark, it felt like time had stopped. Jaqueline, the woman he loved, his wife, was in the clutch of an apex predator, being dragged far away from him and into the wilderness, toward a certain death. Mark couldn't let it happen. If he knew one thing about black bears, it was that they can get scared if one manages to look bigger and fiercer than the beast. In other words, Mark Jordan knew he had to show the bear who the boss really was, no matter the cost. Saving Jaqueline wasn't a decision. It was way more than that. It was an instinct. Before the bear could disappear into the bush with a very wounded Jaqueline, Mark attacked the beast. The man got the bear in a headlock and started punching it in the head, causing the beast to drop Jaqueline. Its attention was now focused on Mark, and so was its rage. Using its claws and massive snapping jaws, the black bear struck back. It didn't matter to Mark. It didn't matter that his body was covered in lacerations, that several of his nerves had been severed by the furious black bear. Mark retaliated, using its Swiss Army knife to stab the beast 5 or 6 times. Suddenly, the animal left, wounded. The man's relentless attack succeeded, but his ordeal was far from over. Jaqueline was still on the ground, seriously injured. She needed help, but the campsite was too remote for rescuers to arrive that quickly. Mark had to get her somewhere safe. He picked Jaqueline up in his arms and started running toward the kayak. His wounds were gushing blood, but nothing was more important to him than making sure Jaqueline survived. Desperate, he climbed into the kayak and started paddling toward the nearest campsite. Badly wounded himself, Mark paddled for almost a mile, crying for help, and then someone heard him. 2 hikers, a father and son from Pennsylvania, heard the screams for help and rushed to Mark's aid. The 2 of them had fought off a black bear themselves less than an hour before hearing Mark's cries. Together, the 3 men paddled for 90 more minutes before coming across a pontoon boat with an off-duty police officer and a doctor from North Carolina on board. It was a miracle. The doctor tried to save Jaqueline Perry while the boat continued on to the park office some 6 miles away. Mark stood by his wife's side, hoping and praying she would survive her brutal wounds. But Jaqueline Perry died before they could make it to the boat office, despite her husband's heroic efforts to save her. 3 hours after the attack, Mark Jordan was taken to Sudbury Regional Hospital. His condition was stable, but he had suffered multiple lacerations, many puncture wounds, and severed nerves. Before doctors could operate, they had to make sure there was no possibility for infection. Meanwhile, police and park workers began their efforts to find the bear, as well as other campers. With visitors not being required to tell park officials they'd entered the area, staff wasn't exactly sure how many people they were looking for. On September 10th, 4 days after the attack, the Ministry of Natural Resources killed a black bear believed responsible for the fatal attack. The bear was found, shot, and killed near the site of the attack. The animal was male and not fully grown, and it had a wound to its neck, one probably inflicted by Mark's knife. Mark Jordan was released from the hospital after getting 300 stitches for his injuries. 2 years later, in 2007, he was given the Star of Courage Award from Governor General Michael Jean. In an interview, the man said he regretted not killing the bear. He also said getting the Star of Courage would help keep Jaqueline Perry's memory alive. When it comes to wildlife encounters, it's better to take everything with a grain of salt. The usually non-aggressive moose can attack when under stress. Bears seen in the distance are never actually too far away. Even your average crow can try to claw your eyes out if you get too close to a nest full of its hatchlings. Knowledge can't always prevent us from making arguably avoidable mistakes in our interactions with nature. In this video, we'll look at one seasoned hiker's fatal encounter with a grizzly bear and at the absurd error that caused the man's demise. This story takes us to Denali National Park and Preserve, formerly known as Mount McKinley National Park, an astonishing Alaskan park centered on the highest mountain in North America, Denali. The landscape is a mix of almost everything: forests at lowest elevations, tundra at middle elevations, glaciers and bare rock at the highest elevations. There are over 6 million acres of superb scenery, sheltering more than 450 species of flowering plants and numerous North American birds and mammals. Denali has hundreds of bears, both grizzlies and black bears, 13 wolf packs, thousands of caribou, Arctic foxes, martens, beavers, you name it. It's one of the most impressive national parks in the entire world, and for anyone who appreciates wilderness, Denali is nothing short of paradise. According to the National Park Service, there are over 600,000 visitors that venture to the park every year, but it never feels overcrowded, thanks to how vast and remote the park is. This is why many lone adventure seekers choose Denali. They want the full experience, unadulterated by any other human presence, even if it could mean utter lack of protection against nature's apex predators. On August 24, 2012, 49-year-old Richard White was hiking near the Toklat River, the largest braided river that is crossed by the Denali Park Road. It wasn't Richard's first visit to Denali, and it certainly wasn't the only hiking trip he went on all by himself. Richard adored nature and always sought to witness and understand wilderness as it was, away from modern life or other people. He had a deep appreciation for even the smallest phenomena and felt comfortable with solitude, especially if it made possible the pursuit of knowledge and peace for the self. Like many of us, Richard White would feel the call of the wild every now and then. In order to soothe that part of him that wanted to get away from everything artificial, he'd spend days hiking, sleeping under the stars, and observing nature. By August 24th, the man had already been backpacking alone for 3 days, and he had 2 more days of exploring left before returning to San Diego, California. His wife and his 21-month-old daughter were waiting for him back home, and so did the prospect of changing his job. Richard was a successful man. He had been the director of exploratory pharmacology at Ferring Pharmaceuticals, but was now looking for a change. Perhaps that's what brought him to Denali, the need to clear his head before starting another chapter of his life. Or maybe it had nothing to do with his job at all. Maybe it was just what a nature-loving adventurer does. There was nothing to be afraid of. After all, Richard had been on so many solo hikes before, and he always made it back home. But that was about to change. In a dramatic turn of events that would stain Denali National Park and Preserve history forever. On that early August afternoon, Richard was hiking along the Toklat when he saw something of extraordinary beauty and power. Sure, he preferred exploring nature by himself, but that didn't mean he didn't want to share the astonishing aspects of his journeys with his family. That's why he always carried a camera on his trips. He most likely wanted to show his daughter pictures from his adventures one day. As soon as he saw the huge grizzly, Richard stopped in his tracks. He grabbed his camera and pointed it at the mighty bear, bewitched by its beauty, its enormous size, and the powerful grace the bear was exuding. There's nothing more impressive than an apex predator in its natural habitat, and the grizzly really was a particularly fine specimen. It looked about 600 pounds, if not more, and it was completely oblivious to the man's presence. The bear was grazing in the willows, no more than 40 yards away from Richard White. The man knew enough about grizzlies to realize he was standing too close to the animal, but failed to back away. Perhaps he was too enchanted by the prospect of snapping some unusual shots. Perhaps he was simply mesmerized by standing so close to something wild and incredibly powerful. Or maybe it just slipped his mind. What we do know is that Richard White made no attempt at leaving. In hindsight, his complete lack of self-preservation instinct makes no sense. His 30 years of backpacking experience aside, Richard White had also taken the park's mandatory bear safety course, which included instructions on how to avoid disturbing bears and what to do if attacked. The course also strongly advised visitors to carry bear spray at least. Some of Denali's visitors choose to arm themselves with firearms, such as rifles, shotguns, and pistols. Richard White's only defense against a potential bear attack was a safety whistle, and he completely disregarded one of the park's rules, which states visitors should keep a quarter-mile distance from bears and slowly back away whenever they see one. At just about 40 yards away from the creature, Richard was 10 times closer to the grizzly than he should have been. As he snapped the 26 photos, Richard most likely didn't even think about his safety. Although he was only 40 yards away from a huge adult grizzly bear, the man spent 8 minutes taking pictures, according to his camera. And the bear didn't seem to mind the man either, at least not for about 7.5 minutes. The first photo was taken at 12:58 p.m. Alaska time. For the most part, they were just regular snapshots of a bear foraging. However, the last of them was different and foreboding. It shows the bear staring directly at the photographer. Its stare definite and focused. The bear looked decidedly agitated. It got closer to the man. There are no witnesses who can say exactly what happened next, but it's pretty easy to piece it together nonetheless. The 600-pound grizzly charged at Richard White and struck him down almost immediately. In a split second, the experienced explorer turned into prey, and then he was dead, killed by the angry bear. A few hours after the attack, 3 hikers on a day trip found something that frightened them. Signs of a struggle, as well as a backpack, torn clothing, and blood. So much blood. They didn't dare go further. Instead, the 3 returned to the Toklet River rest area, about 3 miles south from the gory scene. Park rangers were alerted at about 5:30 p.m. By 8:30 p.m., rangers had boarded a helicopter. During their flight, they spotted a large grizzly bear sitting on what looked like human remains. In fact, the beast had dragged what was left of Richard White in the underbrush, about 150 yards from the initial spot of the attack. It was most likely storing its prey away. The bear ran into the brush, frightened by the sound of the hovering helicopter. However, as rangers tried to reach the remains, the bear started circling them, and darkness was closing in. 2 shots were fired at the animal, but they missed. To avoid any further potential danger, the rangers decided to leave and return the next day. It was a good, sound decision. After all, the bear was guarding its food cache, and it wasn't only a bear anymore, it was a man-eater. On Saturday, August 25, 2012, the rangers returned and finally managed to recover Richard White's body. They were joined by wildlife troopers who shot and killed the grizzly from the helicopter. At 600 pounds, the bear was big for Denali. It was at least 5 years old, and a necropsy revealed it was indeed the specimen responsible for Richard White's death. The area of the Denali backcountry where the attack occurred has been closed, prohibiting all hiking and camping in that area until further notice, and rangers actively work to prevent other park visitors from entering the area. Richard White's death was the first known fatal bear attack on a human in Denali National Park and Preserve's 90-year history, and it remains so even now, 10 years after the gruesome incident. While bears usually attack if they're taken by surprise or if they feel like humans are threatening their food or cubs, it's better to be cautious under any circumstances, no matter whether you're an experienced explorer or not. Fremont County, Colorado, August 1993. This area is covered in an extensive wilderness. It's a huge playground for outdoor enthusiasts and offers hiking, camping, fishing, and rock climbing. Deciduous forests, open ravines, and mountain parks provide habitat for an abundance of wildlife. Mountain lions, elk, beavers, golden eagles, and, of course, black bears live within this impressive landscape. The black bears occupy the forests and meadows that Colorado has to offer. There are approximately 10 to 12,000 black bears in Colorado, and they are most common west of Denver, where this particular attack took place. Black bears are omnivorous, eating a variety of fruit, vegetation, and small animals, including fish, birds, and insects. They are also known to hunt and kill large deer, which will provide them with food for several days. Despite being the smallest of the North American bears, black bears can grow up to 72 inches long and weigh up to 600 pounds. They are mostly solitary animals, but cubs will remain with their mothers for about a year and a half before becoming independent. Black bears are excellent climbers and swimmers. They climb trees to evade danger, feed, and sometimes hibernate amongst the branches. They appear to swim for enjoyment, as well as to catch fish to eat. They have an exceptional sense of smell, 7 times stronger than that of a dog. In Colorado, bear attacks are incredibly rare. Although there are numerous bear sightings each year, local residents and visitors rarely come to any harm. Since the 1970s, there have only been a handful of fatal attacks in Colorado. Colin Mccleland was a 24-year-old logger who lived in Buena Vista. He traveled less than 2 hours in his camping trailer to his timber cutting camp on Wall Mountain. This is a heavily forested and mountainous region. He parked up, set up his trailer, and set out each day to fell trees. He knew the area well and had spent years doing a job he loved. He enjoyed being outdoors amongst nature. Calling the forest his office and getting to camp there each night was the dream life for him. In August 1993, Colorado had suffered a drought. As a result, this had destroyed berry and acorn crops throughout the state, depriving bears of one of their important food sources. There had been a lot of bear sightings in the area that Colin was working in. Colin cooked on his stove inside the trailer. He sealed his garbage each night away from the vehicle and ensured the windows and door were closed whilst he slept. Occasionally at night he would hear what he thought to be bears lurking around his trailer. They sniffed at the sealed trash and paced along the side of the vehicle. Each morning, Colin would find bear footprints around his camp, and he would tentatively set off logging for the day. He slung a high-powered rifle over his shoulder as he walked into the woods and checked his surroundings each time he felled a new tree. On the night of August 10, 1993, as Colin settled down in his bed, he was awoken by a noise. He sat upright and strained his ears. Once again, he could hear heavy footsteps on the ground outside. He held his breath and reached for his rifle. The footsteps stopped, and Colin heard loud sniffing and occasional snorting. Suddenly, a loud noise made Colin jump. It was the sound of a bear placing a heavy paw on the door of the trailer. As it rapped on the door, the trailer shook, and Colin raised the rifle. Something or someone had enticed the bear to the trailer that night. Perhaps it was the smell of the meal that Colin had cooked on his stove wafting out through the windows. Perhaps it was the leftovers in the trash can a short distance away. Or perhaps it was Colin himself. The bear had investigated the area each night, becoming bolder and bolder. It was curious, and it was hungry. Colin's heart leapt as the bear continued to claw at the trailer door. Colin shouted to scare the bear away, but the bear continued to try and pry the door open. Panicked, Colin shot through the trailer walls at the bear. He heard an angry growl. He had nicked the bear. But the bear didn't run. Instead, its attack became frenzied. Its claws sliced through the thin door panel. The flimsy latch was no match for the 400-pound hungry intruder. Suddenly, it snapped and gave way. As the bear clambered into the trailer, Colin quickly tried reloading, but the bear launched itself at him. There was no time to fire another shot. Colin didn't stand a chance. He was killed in the ferocious attack, and what follows is haunting. Forensic investigators found evidence that the bear came back to feast on Colin's body at least 3 times. They know that Colin was killed inside the trailer after desperately trying to shoot the bear, and his body was initially left there. Each night, the bear revisited the trailer, clambered inside, and continued to eat its meal. Colin's friends became worried about him when he failed to show up for a court hearing 3 days later. They headed to Wall Mountain and were devastated by what they found. The remains of Colin's body had been dragged from the trailer and were found 30 yards away. Following this horrific incident, wildlife officers set a bear trap near the scene of the crime. It wasn't long before they caught a large male black bear. It was confident as it walked into the trap. It was also sporting a fresh gunshot wound to one of its legs. Officers were sure this was the bear that killed Colin. They were sure this was the bear that Colin had desperately tried to kill in his last moments. They shot and killed the bear. Bears rarely attack humans unless it's a survival situation. A wounded bear is incredibly dangerous. If it doesn't turn and flee, it'll become aggravated and enraged. There had been a number of bears in the area where Colin was killed. He had reported nuisance bears to officials in the past. That year, a bear had done a lot of damage to nearby cabins. Nuisance bears are ear tagged to help officials keep a record of their movements and activities. They can be euthanized if they cause a lot of trouble. But as people continue to enjoy the outdoors, there will always be encounters with bears. Colin was aware of the safety precautions to take in bear country. He always carried a high-powered rifle with him. He knew to lock up any trash and keep his windows and doors sealed shut. His ultimate mistake was firing at the bear and merely injuring it. This seemed to only enrage the bear and encourage it to follow through with the attack. But when you're holding a rifle and a hungry 400-pound bear is clawing at the door to get in, what are you going to do? This attack was devastating. It's sad that a young man lost his life simply whilst doing his job. But as we continue to work and play in bear country, the likelihood of coming into close contact with these wild animals becomes more and more likely. Respecting these bears and knowing how to enjoy the wilderness safely is important to avoid conflict. Bears shouldn't be the ones to suffer from our carelessness. What's worse than being attacked by a grizzly bear? Being attacked by a grizzly bear twice. June 20th, 2010. It was a mild 59 degrees in June in southern Alaska. In a remote area near Rainy Pass, Iditarod, 54-year-old Robert Miller was finishing up for the day and getting ready to head home. He worked as a geologist for Mill Rock Resources and had been scouting the area for potential metallic mineral deposits. Robert's helicopter was already on its way to collect him. All he had to do now was clear a landing site for the pilot and radio through his exact location. The regional landscape consisted of a mixture of tundra, spruce forests, rivers, and open sea. It's an area that is famed for its wilderness and breathtaking beauty. There are approximately 60,000 grizzly bears living wild in North America. 30,000 of them are found in Alaska. Robert knew he was in bear country, and he had received training prior to beginning his field work should he encounter a bear. He began clearing some brush with a handsaw in preparation for the arrival of the helicopter. His bag was down on the ground, and his back was to the deepest part of the forest. His radio was slotted into his shirt pocket, his .357 Magnum at hand. Midway through clearing the area, Robert heard a noise. He turned around just in time to see a grizzly bear emerge from the undergrowth. Robert was taken by surprise. He had no idea that he had been working in such close proximity to the animal. It stood barely 25 feet away. The bear gave Robert little time to think and little time to act. It came for him. Robert thought that it was a mock charge, as is often the case. However, he was shocked when the bear followed through with the attack. It hadn't growled at Robert or stood on its hind legs in a show of power. Instead, it ran at him straight away. Robert immediately pulled out his .357 Magnum and squeezed the trigger. In the panic, he barely grazed the animal, and realizing the animal wasn't going to stop, Robert flung himself onto the ground. He lay on his stomach and interlocked his fingers behind his neck. He buried his face in the dirt and braced himself for the attack. He had been trained to do this in such an event. He knew that he needed to protect his neck as best as he could, as bears often bite their prey at the back of the neck and head to immobilize it. In less than 15 seconds, the bear had shredded Robert's elbow to the bone. But the attack was over almost as quickly as it had begun. Robert saw the beast lumbering away and breathed a sigh of relief. He lay there for a moment, checking himself over before getting to his knees. Some male grizzlies can grow up to 8 feet long and weigh over 700 pounds. They can smell food from up to a mile away, and their jaws are powerful enough to crush a human skull. They are territorial and can be hostile to intruders. Females are very protective of their cubs and can be aggressive near a carcass they claim as their own. Robert grimaced with the pain in his right arm and was shocked to see the deep wound. As he began to stand up, he glanced to his side, and to his horror, the bear was coming at him again. Robert couldn't believe it and lifted his gun once more. The bear was only 40 yards away. He fired off 2 more rounds. His injured arm was unsteady and shaking, and he missed the bear entirely. He planted himself firmly into the ground again. Face down, he braced for another beating. As the bear mauled Robert again and again, he managed to play dead. The bear thrashed Robert around. Its brute force tossed him like a rag doll. He felt no pain at that point and just kept focused on keeping his body face down and protecting the back of his neck. The bear gnawed and chewed. Robert's left ear was nearly ripped clean off, and his right thigh was sliced deeply by the bear's claws. The pressure of the bites and the ferociousness of the attack were incredible, and yet Robert remained lying there, clinging on to the hope that the bear would once again stop its attack and leave him. His hopes were answered as the bear, for a second time, left him. It snorted and wandered off into the trees. Robert dared not move. He hardly breathed, listening to any signs of the bear. He lay there deadly still, not making a sound. His mind raced. Should he lift his head and check for the bear? Should he remain face down and risk the bear coming back for more? Where was his gun? How badly was he bleeding? The gun had been knocked out of Robert's hand during the attack. He calmed his breathing, taking one deep breath at a time. Then, very slowly, he moved his head to one side. Still lying there, he looked all around. Nothing. Then, very slowly, he turned his head to the other side and searched for the bear. There was no sign of his attacker. Carefully, Robert tried to stand up. He couldn't. He was too badly injured. He managed to roll over onto his back. Gasping in pain, Robert felt in his pocket. He pulled out his radio. Lifting it to his mouth, he made a desperate mayday call. The radio crackled, and then there was silence. Robert tried again and again. Every 20 seconds or so, he made a mayday call, but to his dismay, no one answered. He knew he needed help urgently, but there was no way that he could move. Whilst contemplating his predicament, he suddenly heard the radio crackling to life. It was the helicopter pilot. He wasn't responding to Robert's mayday. Instead, he was calling to find out Robert's exact location so that he could collect him. When Robert told him what had happened, the pilot flew in low and circled the area. Combing the forest in outwardly expanding circles, the pilot was satisfied that the bear had disappeared and went to collect a field medic from the next valley over. Robert breathed a sigh of relief when the helicopter landed yards from him, and the wilderness medic, Ryan Campbell, stepped off. He ran over to Robert and assessed his injuries. He was bleeding badly and had large gaping wounds. As Ryan began cleaning the wounds and applying pressure bandages, Robert grimaced in pain. The pain was immense. Robert described it like a mixture of fire and electricity. Ryan and the pilot lifted Robert into the chopper and lay him down. They flew into a nearby airstrip and radioed ahead. An emergency medic was waiting for them, who then flew Robert to the hospital in Anchorage. It was an agonizing hour-long flight, and Robert gritted his teeth, trying desperately to stay awake. He kept recalling the attack over and over in his head, wondering where he had gone wrong. Could he have done things differently? In the hospital, Robert underwent surgery to fix his open wounds. He was lucky to be alive. He had survived by playing dead. His face suffered nothing but a few scratches. Lying face down and protecting the back of his neck had saved him. He should have taken a bigger caliber gun with him, but even then, he had such little time to react that he still may not have hit the bear. Robert says he doesn't hold a grudge against the animal. He knew that he was in bear territory, and he knew the risks. His training and quick thinking were vital to his survival. Rick Sinnott, a biologist from the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, said that Robert did the right thing by playing dead. He said most bears just want to neutralize the threat. If you're shouting and screaming and waving your arms around, they're going to keep attacking you. But if you remain still and silent, then the threat has been neutralized. The second time around, Robert had been neutralized.